So who are the Nagas? The Nagas are a group of tribal people who live in the territory between the regions of India, China, and Burma. They are known famously as a headhunters hill tribes by the outsiders. The Nagas are a tribal group of people who had lived independently in their own territory for centuries without any outside interference, contact, or a conquest. So who are the Nagas? Why are the Nagas demanding for independence? Why are they asking for an integration of land? But in order to understand that, we have to look back to a history. Let's see that Naga issues through historical perspective. From the beginnings of the Indian civilizations, from Harappan civilizations, Indus Valley civilizations back in 2800 BCE, to Mughal Empire in 16th century, or be it Maratha Empire, Nagas have no connections with the Indian subcontinent. Nagas has no cultural or political attachments or relationships with any of the countries, any of the empires in India. Mauryan Empire, or be it Kushans, or a Gupta Empire, or a Delhi Sultanate, or be that of the Mughal Empire in 16th century, or that of Maratha Empire. Nagas have no attachments or close relationships with any of these empires and dynasties throughout Indian history. It was only the British who were able to penetrate into the interiors of the Naga Hills. In the 13th century, the Ahoms were passing through the Naga Hills and came in contact with the Nagas. The Nagas had fiercely resisted against the Ahoms but were defeated. Though there was a constant hostilities between the Ahoms and the Nagas, but in the later years, the matrimonial alliances between the Nagas and the Ahoms developed. The Nagini Mura is a historical evidence of one of the finest examples of relationships between the Nagas and the Ahoms. The Ahoms never tried to conquer, annex, or interfere in the internal administrations of the Nagas through the rules of 600 years. During the Mughal and the Burmese invasion on Assam, the Nagas sheltered and protected the Ahoms in the Naga Hills. This cordial relationship led to the development of trade and commerce in the plains, which leads to the development of the Nagamis, which are spoken by the Nagas to this day. But by the beginning of the 19th century, after the Anglo-Burmese War, the Nagas comes in contact with the British. After the Anglo-Burmese War, by the Treaty of Yandambo that was signed between the Burmese and the British in 1826, it allows the British to gain the control over the territory of Assam, Kachar and Jantia Hills. So in 1832, Captain Jenkins and Lieutenant Pemberton were moving with around 700 Manipuri troops and 800 coolies, passing through the Naga Hills across the Angami territory. The Angami village like Kodama, Mezoma, Jakama, Pifema, Busoma opposed the British trespassing and offered a strong resistance against the British. Ultimately led to the establishment of military posts by the British at Samaguti, now modern Chomukirima, in 1866. After a policy of non-interference adopted by the British, in 1874, Captain Johnston adopted the policy of annexations. So in 1878, Kohima was invaded and was captured on 27 March 1880. The Angamis were able to drive out the British from the Kohima and seize Kohima for some time. But the British sent a reinforcement under Colonel Johnston arrived at Kohima with a force of around 2,000 Manipuri troops, 30 sepoys and 50 policemen. With this force, Kohima was recaptured by the British again. Then in 1881, Kohima was formally annexed to the British territory and retained as a British territory. And from then on, the process of modernizations of westernizations of the Nagas began. The comings of Christianity, political, economic and social changes took place with the coming of British colonizations in the Naga Hills. The First World War played a very important role in the awakening of the political consciousness of the Nagas. It changed their perspective towards the outlooks of the worldview, which led to the awakenings of national consciousness in the minds of the Nagas to have an independent nation of their own. The British, with the introductions of Western educations in the Naga Hill, had effectively and efficiently able to use the Nagas in the maintenance of the administration, in the runnings of the administration. The British introduced the systems of delegates in 1842, which later transformed into a Dobashi systems in 1860, and which continued to play an important role in the administrations till today. The British have introduced the policy of annexations, and with this the systems of protections of the Nagas began. So in 1874, under Captain Johnston, the three villages, Mazifima, Shitikema, Penima, and even one of the most powerful village, Mozuma, have agreed to become a British subject, and as a result, the red blanket was given to those Naga villages that have accepted to become a British subject as an identity of a British subject, and consequently led to the appointments of GB systems in 1882. Though the British colonization begins in the Naga Hill, the British did not try to interfere in the internal administrations of the Nagas. The administrations was purely left upon the Nagas to look after themselves and was left in the hands of Gaupura and Dobashis. With the annexations of the Naga village after the battles of Konama in 1880, the British further made an expeditions into the interiors of the Naga hills. In 1875, Lotha territory was annexed, Au territory in 1889. By 1900, the British colonization was fully pushed to these regions, and later on, the British made an expeditions into the Sema territory against the Bikambi village, and consequently, Sema territory was annexed in 1904, followed by the annexations of Pomek territory in 1910. The British colonized the Naga hills only for two primary reasons. Number one, to protect the British subjects in the regions of Sibsagas, in the plains of Assam and Manipur, and to secure a safe passage of road between Assam, Burma and Manipur. And in order to achieve this objective, the British demarcated and divided the boundaries of the Naga hills into different parts. The first boundary line with Manipur was drawn in 1842, and it was restructured again in 1872. Major General Johnston, in his autobiography, clearly stated that the British have arbitrarily demarcated the boundary lines of the Naga Hills. Let us understand that the British made the first expeditions to the Naga Hills in 1832, and right after 10 years, they drew the boundaries of the Naga Hills without even knowing the regions of the Naga Hills. So the British, even before the conquest, even before the annexations, even before knowing the whole of the Naga Hill region, divided the lands of the Naga Hills into different parts for achieving this objective. The Assam Scheduled District Act 1874 was passed, and regulations was amended for the Naga Hills. The British did not interfere in the internal affairs and laws of the Nagas, and left freely to administer into their own traditional, customary rules and regulations. It is also interesting to note that the British Code of Law, Indian Penal Code, or the Code of Criminal Procedures was never implemented in the Naga Hills. The Naga Hills was governed as an excluded area up to 1947, and under the Government of India it was kept under the Ministry of External Affairs till 1957. As said, the First World War played a very important, a crucial role in the awakenings of the political consciousness. It broadened the political consciousness of the Nagas. During the First World War, 2,000 Nagas were recruited into the French labor corps, of which the enrollment divided into as 1,000 Semas, 400 Lothas, 200 Raimas, 200 Owls, and 200 Princes of Changs and other Naga tribes. From here, the Naga participants in the war have exposed to the idea of nationalism, patriotism, unity in brotherhoods, integrity, and self-determination. And after their returns to the Naga Hills, they formed the Naga Club in 1918, primarily to look after the welfare of the Nagas and promote and foster unity among the Nagas. The unity among the Nagas was needed and necessitated because of the long tribal practice of headhunting, and therefore they worked towards fostering the unity among the Nagas, which paved the way for the inceptions of the Naga national movement, the struggle for self-determination, the struggle for sovereignty of the Nagas. And in 1945, Charles Poussey, the then Governor General of the Nagas Hills, established an organization, Naga Hill District Tribal Council, on 7th April 1945, as an acknowledgement to the Nagas who have immensely contributed to the British during the Japanese invasions. The Nagas rendered their lives and blood to fight back the Japanese at Kohima during the Second World War. But in return of this selfless sacrifice made by the Nagas, the British in turn threw away the Nagas in the hands of an alien rule. The Nagas submitted the memorandum to Simon Commission on January 10, 1929, Cabinet Mission on 9 April 1946, to the Crown Governments of India on 17 March 1947, Winston Churchill on 28 March 1947, to Clement Attlee, PM of England on March 29, 1947, to Mountbatten on May 1947. The British could have settled the Naga issues at that period of time. The Naga issues was within their power, but the British never felt the priority for saving their life to their victory. Had Nagas not rendered a selfless sacrifice to the British at the Battle of Kohima, the Japanese would have penetrated into the interiors of India, and the British would have a humiliating defeat. But even after facing a lot of atrocities, tortures, killings of the Nagas by the Japanese force, the Nagas overcomes all of this suffering, and in return, the British left the Nagas messing up their life, throwing them into darkness, which continued to this day. NNC then sent a memorandum to Jawaharlal Nehru, but Nehru rejected the memorandum because he considered the Naga territory too small to exist and the people backward to govern themselves. Nehru clearly knew that the Naga territory is not a part of India, but he wanted to include the Naga Hills under a union of India. So NNC again submitted memorandums to the Viceroy of India, Lord Louis Mountbatten, with the demand that interim governments will have powers over legislations, executive and judiciary. The interim governments also will have full powers over revenues and expenditures, and that India aided the Nagas in need of emergency in defense. As a result, the advisory committee was set up and it recommended that Naga Hill be included in the Indian unions. But the Nagas want a complete independence. So on 27 June 1947, Nehru sent Akbar Haidari, governor of Assam, to Kohima. NNC then submitted a memorandum to Haidari. The Haidari agreement became controversial. There was nothing about the inclusions of complete independence after the end of the terms of an agreement. The Nagas leaders were also threatened to sign the agreement. So NNC under Azad Fizo, along with Karado Sukhai, visited Gandhiji on 19 July 1947. In a meeting, Gandhiji clearly said that he believed in the brotherhood of man and that he did not believe in a forced union. The Nagas have every right to be free themselves, to be independent, and that he would be the first one to get shot for the cause of the Nagas. But sadly, he was assassinated in January 1948, and one of the great men who wished for the goodness of the Nagas come to an end. The extremist group under Azad Fizo gained momentum for the demands of complete independence of the Nagas, and consequently on 16 May 1951, a plebiscite was carried out where the majority of 99% voted for a complete independence of Nagaland. In 1951, Naga delegates met Nehru at Tezpur in Assam, but he declined the demands for independence. As a result, Nagas boycotted the first general elections in 1952. The NNC under Azad Fizo met Nehru at Delhi, which took an ugly turn in the Naga history. At the meeting, Nehru with his fist hammered the tablets and said, "Whether heaven falls or India goes into pieces and blood runs red into the country, whether I am here or anyone else comes, Nagas will not be allowed to be independent." With a heavy humiliations and disappointment, they returned back to the homeland. On 30 March 1953, Nehru and Burmese Prime Minister U Nu jointly visited Kohima with Mrs. Indira Gandhi, NNC wanted to submit a memorandum and wanted to let the people know about the NNC stance on Naga independence before its people and before the crowd. But Nehru declined to accept any memorandums, which the Naga in turn boycotted the meetings, leaving just a handful of government servants to be addressed. Nehru felt humiliated that he did not even speak a word on his way journey to Burma. In September 1954, Azad Fiza first formed the Honking government, that is, People Sovereign Republic of Nagaland. Consequently, Naga Home Guard, Naga Safeguard was formed in 1954. After that, Assam Rifle was deployed in Tensang frontier area, and on 27th November 1954, the Indian Army bombed the Chingmai village. By 1955, violence started in Tensang frontier area. Assam Maintenance of Public Order Act 1953 and Assam Disturbs Area Act 1955 was introduced in the Nagas. And taking advantage of the internal conflicts, the government of India declared the whole Naga Hills as a disturbed area on 31st January 1956. 3 Indian army were killed at Hutli, which led to the full-fledged battles at Hoshipur in 1956. Battalions of Indian army were deployed in the Naga Hills. The Indian army started to carry out an offensive against the Nagas. Thousands of Nagas were killed, their houses were burned to ashes, churches were disarranged, women were molested and raped inside the church. The villagers were kept in a concentrated camp without a proper hygienic system. Thousands of people died of sickness, disease, hunger. People were mercilessly beaten and killed. The struggle for peace, the struggle for independence continued to this day.